What if the life you built was based on a lie, and everyone you loved helped keep it that way? Claire Bennett was erased from her own story by the people closest to her, her husband, her father, and the legacy they protected. But when a secret inheritance cracked the surface, Claire unearthed decades of betrayal, forged identities, and a bloodline no one wanted her to discover. This is a story of quiet revenge, unspoken truths, and a woman who turned exile into power, because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is come back knowing everything. Chapter 1: The Family That Never Saw Me. I'm Claire Bennett, the daughter they barely noticed until I built something they couldn't ignore. I leaned back against the worn leather seat of my old Honda Civic, parked discreetly at the far edge of my parents' circular driveway. Through the windshield I could see the grand white columns of the Bennett estate, rising against the twilight. The house looked exactly as it had every other year. Manicured hedges, polished brass fixtures glowing under the soft exterior lights, a monument to a legacy I had never quite belonged to. In 30 minutes, the annual Bennett family dinner would begin. The same carefully choreographed evening of polished silverware, vintage wine, and subtle dismissals. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to stay silent. I glanced at my phone. One missed text from Alicia. SoftBank team confirming final terms tonight. Be ready. I exhaled slowly, shoving the phone deep into my purse. They didn't know. None of them knew, not about Vitalik Health, not about the pending deal that would catapult my company, my vision, into a different stratosphere. For them, I was still the underachieving middle child, the one who tinkered with computers instead of building a respectable life. A knock on my window startled me. "Miss Claire," Margot smiled warmly through the glass. The Bennett's housekeeper for over 20 years, and the only person here who had ever greeted me with genuine affection. "It's good to see you." "You too, Margot." I stepped out of the car and handed her a modest bottle of Cabernet. $30, not the $300 labels tucked away in my personal collection. "Everyone's already inside," she said quietly. "Your brother is announcing something big tonight." Of course he was. Andrew Bennett, Harvard MBA, heir apparent to my father's empire. My father's pride, my mother's perfectly groomed son. I smoothed my simple black Banana Republic dress, adjusted the Cartier watch hidden beneath my sleeve, and followed Margot through the massive oak doors. The familiar chill of the marble foyer wrapped around me. Family portraits lined the staircase, generations of Bennetts staring down with the same icy perfection I had never mastered. In the solarium, crystal glasses clinked beneath towering windows. My father Richard stood near the fireplace, a tumbler of scotch in hand, already commanding the room. My mother, Vivian, adjusted a tray of canapes with surgical precision. Andrew's booming voice floated across the space as Lauren listened with adoring attention. And then there was Maggie, Aunt Margaret, a rare splash of color in this sea of navy and gray. She caught my eye and gave the faintest wink. "There she is," my mother announced the moment I stepped in, as though I were hours late instead of precisely on time. "Hello, Mother," I replied, accepting her air kiss. "You really should consider moving back to Boston," she sighed. "Cambridge is so inconvenient." Before I could respond, my father's voice thundered from across the room. "There's our computer whiz." He raised his glass but didn't move. "Still playing with apps, Claire?" "Something like that," I answered coolly. Andrew swooped in next, reeking of power and privilege. 14 people reporting to me now," he boasted. "Corner office, Harbor View, but I'm sure clicking buttons is fun too." I smiled thinly. Same script, different year. Maggie drifted over as the pre-dinner drinks wore on. "Ignore them," she whispered. "How are you really?" "Surviving," I whispered back, grateful for her presence. But tonight I was more than surviving. I was waiting. and deep down I suspected, perhaps even hoped, that the Bennetts were about to meet a version of Claire Bennett they'd never prepared for. Dinner was served promptly at 7. No surprise, the Bennetts didn't tolerate lateness, not even from blood. We filed into the formal dining room, a cavernous space designed to impress. Crystal chandeliers, oil portraits of unsmiling ancestors. A mahogany table so long it seemed more suited to corporate board meetings than family meals. The place settings never changed. My father at one end, my mother at the other. Andrew and Lauren flanking one side, and me, always opposite them, next to an empty chair that once belonged to my late grandfather. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Margot brought out the first course, lobster bisque, no doubt selected for maximum ostentation. My mother lifted her glass, her tone polished and brittle, to family and to many wonderful developments this year. I traced the rim of my wine glass with a fingertip. Here it came, the ritual of updates, a performance disguised as conversation. Andrew led, naturally. Details of his new promotion, his expanded team, the lucrative merger he'd helped close. My mother leaned forward, hanging on every word. "And they selected you over how many other candidates, darling?" she prompted, eyes sparkling. Lauren followed seamlessly, pivoting to wedding updates and her fiancé's rising political connections. Her voice oozed rehearsed modesty. "Brian's mentor thinks he could run for state senate before he's 40, she added, as though this were casual small talk. Then came the pause, the collective glance down the table, my father's expectant gaze. "And what about you, Claire?" he asked, voice dipped in condescension. "Anything new with your computer job?" I steadied my breath. This moment, the one I had rehearsed in my head 100 times, arrived not with the satisfaction I'd imagined, but with a hollow ache I hadn't expected. "Actually," I began, voice calm, "the healthcare app I've been working on is doing well. We've expanded to several hospitals." "That's nice, dear," my mother cut in, eyes already drifting toward Andrew. "James, tell everyone about the new summer house you're looking at in Nantucket." And just like that, I was dismissed. The conversation flowed on without me. Talk of waterfront properties and wedding guest lists. I forced a polite smile. Swirling wine I no longer tasted. Across the table, Aunt Maggie caught my eye and offered a small, encouraging smile. She alone seemed to sense what I was holding back. Main course cleared, my father cleared his throat, the Bennett signal for an important announcement. Instantly the table fell silent. "Your mother and I have been doing some estate planning," he began, swirling his scotch. "With Andrew's career advancement and Lauren's upcoming nuptials, it seemed the appropriate time to revisit the family's financial arrangements." My stomach tightened. "As you know, the Bennett name carries certain expectations," he continued. "We've always emphasized making choices that honor the family legacy." Andrew puffed with pride. Lauren beamed. "And so," my father pressed on, "James will be taking over as trustee of the main investment portfolio." He nodded toward my brother. "And following Lauren's wedding, we'll be gifting her and Brian the Cape Cod property." Lauren placed a hand on her heart, murmuring about how honored she was. My mother dabbed her eyes theatrically. Then my father's gaze turned clinical. "Which brings us to you, Claire." I sat straighter, breath shallow. Maggie's hand found mine beneath the table and squeezed gently. "We've supported your unconventional choices for some time," my father continued, "but we've decided, effective immediately, to cut you off financially." The words landed like a slap, though I hadn't relied on family money since MIT. "The annual allowance, any inheritance considerations, access to family properties, all of it," he elaborated, tone devoid of emotion. "Until you demonstrate more appropriate choices befitting a Bennett," Lauren chimed in sweetly. "They just want what's best for you, Claire." My mouth tasted of iron. I swallowed hard. "You've never once asked about what I actually do," I said quietly. "You decided years ago my work wasn't valuable because it didn't fit your narrow definition of success." "That's not true." my mother protested weakly. "We've always supported your independence." I opened my mouth to respond, but my purse began to vibrate. Once, twice, again, a relentless buzz. "Alicia." I glanced down, multiple calls in quick succession. Her emergency signal. The room blurred at the edges. "Perhaps you should answer that," Maggie said softly. "It seems urgent." My father sighed. "The little startup emergency can't wait until after family dinner?" I rose slowly, pulling my phone from my purse. Alicia's name flashed across the screen. "Excuse me," I said, stepping back from the table but staying in view. I answered. "Alicia, what's happening?" Her voice came through, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Claire, SoftBank just confirmed. They're in. 40 million. Valuation is official. 100 million pre-IPO. The Goldman team is popping champagne." I froze. Around the table, forks hovered midair, faces drained of color. No one spoke. And in that electric silence, I felt it. For the first time in my life at this table. All eyes were finally on me. Now that Claire has revealed her company's true worth in front of a family that just disowned her, how will they react when the power dynamics shift in an instant? Have you ever wished for that one moment when those who dismissed you are forced to see your value? And what would you do if it finally came? Stay with us. In Chapter 2, the dinner takes a turn no one could have predicted, and Claire faces the one thing harder than building success, protecting it from those who now want a share of it. Chapter 2. The call that changed everything. When your family cuts you off, the sweetest revenge is answering the call that proves you no longer need them. The silence was suffocating. For one suspended moment, no one at the table moved. The clink of crystal, the drone of conversation. All had vanished, replaced by an unnatural stillness. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, the weight of Alicia's words still vibrating in my bones. 40 million. 100 million valuation. Goldman popping champagne. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the gravity of what had just happened. The family that had moments ago publicly disowned me was now witnessing the precise moment their dismissal unraveled. "Alicia," I said, my voice calm but resonant, "can you run through the details again?" She did, clearly, confidently. As she spoke, I let my gaze sweep across the table. My father's face had darkened, scotch forgotten in his grip. My mother's wine glass hovered midair. Lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Andrew looked as though someone had physically struck him, his posture rigid. Lauren, her perfect facade finally cracked, stared openly, mouth ajar. And Maggie, God bless her, sat back in her chair, a faint, knowing smile curving her lips. They were hearing every word, and I wasn't going to stop it. "Yes, Alicia," I said clearly, ensuring my voice carried across the room. "That's excellent news. Please confirm the press timing with Goldman and let's prepare our internal team call first thing tomorrow." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse. The silence held for a beat longer. Then, from the far end of the table, a sound I hadn't heard at a Bennett dinner in years. Aunt Maggie's soft, delighted laugh. She raised her glass. "Well," she said, eyes twinkling, "I believe congratulations are in order." That broke the spell. "Claire, darling," my mother gushed. Her voice suddenly honeyed, as if the previous conversation had never happened. "Why didn't you tell us about all this sooner? What wonderful news." My father recovered next, businessman mode fully engaged. 100 million valuation, he repeated slowly, as though tasting each word. "For your healthcare application?" "Vital Link Health," I replied, folding my napkin deliberately. "We're preparing for our initial public offering, led by Goldman Sachs." I saw it then, the flicker of calculation behind his eyes. My mother leaned forward eagerly. "Claire, this is incredible. Why haven't you shared more about your work with us?" "Because until 5 minutes ago," I said evenly, You made it clear my career wasn't worthy of discussion." "Now that's not fair," Andrew jumped in, voice forced. "We were concerned about stability. Startups fail all the time." This is impressive," Lauren chimed in, eyes bright with opportunity. "With your expertise and Brian's political connections, we could really build something meaningful. Imagine the synergy." I fought the urge to laugh. One phone call and suddenly I was the golden child. "Stay grounded," Alicia's training echoed in my mind. "Success attracts opportunists faster than it attracts allies." "I appreciate the sudden interest," I said, uncool. "But nothing about what I've built has changed in the last 10 minutes. Only your perception of it." That drew a small, sharp nod from Maggie. Richard cleared his throat, voice more measured now. "Perhaps we should revisit our earlier family decisions. There may be new opportunities here, ways the Bennett name can support your efforts." I lifted my glass, watching him carefully. "Or perhaps I'll consider what kind of relationship I want with this family moving forward." My words hung in the air, heavy with new weight, and for the first time in years I saw uncertainty and something very close to respect flicker in my father's eyes. But the evening wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. As Margot cleared the dishes, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down. A text from Alicia. "Forbes confirmed you're in. Billionaires in the Making series shoot next week." I smiled faintly, tucking the phone away. They hadn't seen anything yet. The wine seemed sweeter now, or perhaps it was the bitter taste of irony that lingered on my tongue. Across the table my family was scrambling, each of them recalibrating, hunting for their new angle. The disowned daughter had just become the family's most valuable asset. Richard leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Claire, clearly we've had a misunderstanding about your professional situation. I believe we should discuss the family's potential involvement, perhaps an investment position." I met his gaze. "My circumstances haven't changed since this dinner began. I'm still the same founder of the same company, the one you deemed unworthy of family support 30 minutes ago." He flinched slightly but recovered. "That was a hasty decision," he admitted. "The Bennett name could open many doors for Vitalink's next phase." "Most of those doors," I replied evenly, "have already opened. Without your help." Lauren jumped in, voice laced with artificial warmth. "Claire, with your tech expertise and Brian's political platform, we could make real impact. Healthcare is a key issue for his campaign." I tilted my head. "You want to leverage my work for political optics?" She blinked. "I mean..." "We'd highlight the innovation, naturally." Andrew, always the strategist, spoke next. "A pre-IO family stake would be smart. We'd all benefit, and it would show unity to the market." I set my glass down, the crystal ringing softly against the mahogany. "Vitalink's cap table is already full, and I'm not adding seats to appease optics." Vivian, sensing the shift, tried a different tactic. "Darling, we are your family. We want to support you properly now." "Now that I'm rich?" I asked quietly. She recoiled, but Richard pressed on. "Let's not dwell on the past. Moving forward, the Bennett network can still provide strategic value." I exhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch. "You've had years to show interest in my work and chose not to. I won't rewrite that history for convenience." Maggie's eyes twinkled across the table, proud, steady. Andrew's jaw tensed. "You're being difficult, Claire. Business requires pragmatism. So does protecting what you've built," I countered. "Vitalink doesn't need family capital or influence, and it never will." I rose, napkin folded with precision. "I think I'll be leaving now. I have an early meeting tomorrow." Vivian stood abruptly. "But we haven't discussed your media strategy. Your father has excellent connections." "I have a PR team," I said softly, "and a legal team, and every other professional service I need." Richard stood too, voice firm. "Family is more important than momentary disagreements." I looked at him, really looked. and saw not a father trying to mend fences, but a man calculating risk and return. That may be true, I said, which is why I need time to decide what kind of relationship I want with this family going forward. Turning to Maggie, I offered my hand. Would you like a ride home? I'd love one, she said, rising gracefully. As we walked toward the foyer, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down. Alicia, Financial Times wants to feature you as Healthcare Innovator of the Year. Need confirmation by tomorrow. A slow smile spread across my face. I pushed open the grand front door, the night air crisp and cool against my skin. Behind me, the Bennett legacy sat stunned in its gilded cage. Ahead of me, my own legacy was just beginning to take flight. Now that Claire has drawn a clear line between her success and her family's sudden interest, will the Bennetts accept her boundaries or find new ways to cross them? Have you ever faced the moment when those who once dismissed you suddenly want to claim your success? And how would you protect what you've built? Stay with us. In Chapter 3, Claire discovers that walking away is only the first battle. The real fight begins when those you've outgrown refuse to let go. Chapter 3, The Price of Being Valuable. The moment they see your value is the moment they forget who you really are. The click of the front door behind me felt like the closing of a chapter I'd spent a lifetime trapped inside. Maggie and I walked in silence toward my car, her arm lightly looped through mine. The chill of the evening Boston air cut through my thin dress, but the flush of adrenaline burning in my chest kept me warm. As I started the engine, Maggie settled into the passenger seat with a wry smile. 50 million on paper, and they still expect you to come running when they snap their fingers. I gave a short laugh, though my hands gripped the wheel tighter than I intended. They'll learn, or they won't, she replied gently. But you've learned. That's what matters. The drive to her brownstone in Cambridge was blessedly quiet, the kind of silence only someone who truly knew me could offer. No questions, no praise, just presence. After dropping her off, I continued home alone. My South Boston loft, once a symbol of quiet independence, now felt different, like a refuge fortified by new resolve. Inside, I slipped off my heels and padded barefoot toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. My phone buzzed again. 4 missed calls. 3 from my father, 1 from Lauren. A text from Andrew. Impressive move, Claire. Let's grab coffee soon. Would love to hear more about healthcare tech opportunities. I scoffed aloud. Healthcare tech opportunities? The same brother who couldn't be bothered to ask what I did 2 hours ago now wanted a meeting. Another text, this one from Vivian. Darling, I've added you to the guest list for the Symphony Gala next month. The chairman would love to discuss a potential donation from your company. The brazenness was almost admirable. Then Lauren, more direct. Brian would love to discuss ways to feature your platform in his campaign. Could Secure Health consider a donation? Yes, I'd love to introduce you to my friend Thomas. Harvard Med, family money, very eligible. I tossed the phone onto the couch, exhaling sharply. They weren't reaching out to congratulate me. They weren't curious about VitalLink's mission or the patients we were helping. They wanted access, association, a piece of what they'd once dismissed. But this time, I was ready. Morning came too soon, sunlight filtering through linen curtains. I rose early, mind already turning toward work. At VitalLink's Kendall Square office, the team buzzed with energy. Champagne had flowed the night before, but now the real work began. IPO paperwork, international expansion, legacy, built on my terms. In my office, a delivery awaited, a towering floral arrangement with a card from my mother. So proud of our brilliant daughter. Love, Mom and Dad. I stared at the card, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. 24 hours ago, I was being cut off. Now, I was their brilliant daughter. Before I could process the moment, my assistant poked her head in. Your father's called 3 times this morning, and Andrew is in the lobby. I frowned. Andrew says he was in the neighborhood. I sighed, already knowing this conversation wasn't about brotherly affection. Give me 5 minutes, I said, standing. Then send him in. 5 minutes later, Andrew strode into my office as if he owned the place. He glanced around, trying to mask the flicker of surprise in his eyes. The glass walls, the framed Wall Street Journal article about Vitalink, the team photos, the modern, purposeful space. It wasn't the makeshift startup he had likely imagined. He let out a low whistle. Nice setup, he said, sliding his hands into the pockets of his bespoke suit. Very tech, startup chic. I didn't offer him a seat. What brings you to Kendall Square, Andrew? Dad's office is downtown. He smiled, tight, controlled. Can't a brother visit his successful sister? I folded my arms. Of course, though you've never done so before. He had the grace to look slightly sheepish. Look, Claire, about last night. I held up a hand. Stop. If you're here with investment proposals or partnership ideas, save us both the time. His smile faltered. That's a bit harsh. It's pragmatic, I replied. Vitalink is off limits to family involvement. That's not going to change. Andrew shifted, the salesman mask sliding into place. Claire, be reasonable. The Bennett name still carries weight. Strategic partnerships, political access, we can help. I met his gaze, steady. For 4 years, no one in this family asked what I was building. You didn't ask, you didn't care. Now that it's worth something, suddenly you're interested. That's not fair, he protested. We didn't know. Because you didn't want to know, I said, voice calm but sharp. There's a difference. He straightened. Dad feels terrible about last night, cutting you off. It was meant to motivate you. I arched a brow. And if I wasn't standing here today with a $100 million company, would cutting me off still have been appropriate? His silence was answer enough. I moved toward the door, signaling the conversation was over. Andrew, I have a meeting in 10 minutes. Real investors, the ones who believed in this company before knowing its valuation. He hesitated, then nodded stiffly. I'll tell Dad you're busy. Maybe dinner next week? He wants to make things right. Tell him I'll call when I'm ready. I paused. And Andrew, if you're ever genuinely interested in what I do, really interested, I'd be happy to explain it, but only then. He gave a curt nod and left. As the door clicked shut, I exhaled. The first of many conversations like this, I was sure. I turned back to my desk and the towering flower arrangement from my mother. Without a second thought, I reached for the phone. Send these to Mass General's Children's Ward, I told my assistant, and hold all family calls for the rest of the day. Yes, Claire. Settling back into my chair, I opened my laptop. The real work, the work that mattered, awaited. But as I typed, a new message flashed on the screen. Alicia, Senator's Health Innovation Forum. Invitation for you to keynote. High visibility. Big press. Confirm? I stared at the screen, a slow smile forming. It seemed walking away was just the beginning. Now I had a stage of my own. Now that Claire has drawn her line with Andrew, how far will the Bennett family go next to reclaim a stake in her success? Have you ever had to protect what you've built from the very people who once dismissed you? And how do you find the strength to stand firm when they come knocking? Stay with us. In Chapter 4, Claire steps onto a public stage of her own, but with growing visibility comes new risks, and the Bennett family's next moves may be more calculated than ever. Chapter 4, the family that follows success. When they start chasing you, remember why you walked away. I used to think that building success would finally bring peace, that validation might quiet old wounds. I was wrong. Success doesn't silence the voices that once dismissed you. It only changes the tone, from condescension to calculated praise, from exclusion to entitlement. And now they were coming. The days after the Financial Times feature were a blur. Emails flooded in, invitations multiplied, healthcare conferences, private investment circles, a keynote slot at the upcoming Senators Health Innovation Forum. Vital Link's mission, connecting patients to critical care faster, was finally earning the attention it deserved. And with that visibility came something else, the Bennetts circling back in full force. It started with a phone call from Vivian. "Darling," she began sweetly, "I was thinking we should celebrate properly. The family is hosting a benefit gala next week. The mayor's office will be represented. It would be wonderful to have you speak, and of course to showcase Vital Link's incredible work." I almost laughed. The same family benefit where 2 years ago my mother had introduced me to donors as Claire, our creative one, works in tech, I think. Now they wanted me at the podium. I gave the diplomatic answer, "I'll check my schedule." The next day a handwritten invitation arrived at my office, gold embossed no less, a celebration of innovation and legacy, hosted by the Bennetts. Legacy. That word landed like a stone. Maggie caught me reading the card during our standing Thursday lunch. "They're trying to wrap themselves around your success now," she said softly. "Be careful." "I know," I replied, "but this is strategic." "You're going?" she asked, brows lifting. I nodded slowly. "I am, on my terms." The night of the gala, I dressed with deliberate restraint. A sleek navy sheath, understated Cartier watch, no family heirlooms. At the Bennett estate, the front lawn gleamed beneath canopied lights. Photographers clustered at the entrance. Inside, the ballroom was awash in crystal and velvet. "Claire," Vivian descended upon me the moment I entered. "You look radiant. Everyone is eager to meet you." I kept my smile polite, measured. As we moved through the crowd, familiar faces emerged, Boston's elite, many of whom had once barely registered my presence. Now they greeted me with warmth that rang hollow. And then came the moment I had anticipated. From the stage, Richard's voice echoed through the room. "It is my great pleasure to introduce my daughter, Claire Bennett, a shining example of Bennett innovation and vision." I swallowed a sharp retort. Innovation and vision they had tried to cut off, but tonight wasn't about airing grievances, it was about drawing the line. I stepped onto the stage, gaze steady beneath the lights. The weight of 100 eyes settled on me as I stepped to the podium. A sea of faces, investors, politicians, family, friends, all suddenly eager to claim proximity to my success. At the front table, Vivian beamed, Richard's expression controlled but expectant. Andrew sat stiffly, Lauren's gaze laser-focused, likely already imagining sound bites for Brian's campaign. I adjusted the microphone. My voice, when it came, was clear and steady. "Good evening," I began. "When I was first invited tonight, I'll admit, I hesitated, a polite ripple of laughter. I let it hang a beat longer than necessary. You see, not long ago I sat at family dinners where my work was met with polite dismissal, or no interest at all. Not because it lacked value, but because it didn't fit within a certain definition of success. I let my gaze sweep the room, landing briefly on my parents. Tonight, I stand here representing Vital Link Health. A company built from countless hours, risks taken, failures learned. A company that exists today because of the people who believed in it when no one else did." From the side, I caught Maggie's subtle nod of encouragement. "Our mission is simple, to connect patients with the care they need, faster and more effectively. Every day, lives are changed, not because of legacy or name, but because of innovation and relentless effort." I paused, letting the words settle. "And while I'm proud to stand here tonight, I'll be clear. This success belongs first and foremost to the team who built it with me, to the mentors and partners who stood by when others looked away, and to the patients whose stories drive us forward." A longer pause this time. No hollow platitudes, no performative gratitude toward a family that had tried to erase me from their narrative. I thank you for your time, I concluded, voice calm but pointed, and I invite those truly aligned with our mission to join us, in action, not just in applause. I stepped away from the podium, heart steady. Around the room the applause began, polite at first, then swelling. But at the head table, my father's hands remained still. My mother's smile was frozen in place. Andrew's jaw twitched. Lauren whispered furiously to Brian, whose face had gone several shades paler. I made my way back through the crowd, greeted now with a different kind of deference. People I barely knew were suddenly eager to shake my hand. Vivian caught me near the champagne bar.
"Darling,"
she said, voice low but urgent.
"that was strong. Perhaps a bit too pointed."
I met her gaze. Honest, mother. Sometimes that's more valuable than diplomacy. Richard appeared at her side, his tone clipped. Claire, you should have coordinated your remarks with us. We had key donors expecting a different message. My remarks weren't for donors, I replied evenly. They were for the people who've supported our work. I caught Maggie's eye across the room. She smiled, pride unmistakable. As the evening wound down, the attempts continued. Andrew proposing a private meeting, Lauren inviting me to a campaign brunch. I declined them all with the same steady grace. By midnight, I was back in my loft, the skyline glittering beyond the windows. A new message from Alicia awaited. Girls in Tech Conference, keynote confirmed, expecting strong media interest. And beneath it, another, less expected, from an unknown number. You made quite an impression tonight, let's talk. Senator Collins' office. I stared at the screen, pulse quickening, the stakes were rising. And the Bennetts weren't the only ones watching anymore. Now that Claire has taken the public stage and drawn a line between her success and her family's legacy, how will the Bennetts react as the spotlight shifts beyond their control? Have you ever had to speak your truth in front of those who once silenced you? And how does it feel when your words finally echo louder than their approval? Stay with us in Chapter 5 as Claire's influence expands onto a national stage, new allies and new threats emerge, and the Bennetts are not prepared to be left behind. Chapter 5. The choice to define myself. Some gifts come wrapped in rejection, and they free you to build your own name. Success, when it finally arrived, came with unexpected weight. In the weeks after the gala, Vitalink's IPO preparation accelerated. The feature in Financial Times sparked a wave of inbound interest, speaking invitations, partnership offers, new media profiles. But amidst the whirlwind, one idea crystallized more sharply than all the rest. If my family had taught me anything, it was this. Legacy is only as valuable as what you choose to do with it. And so I decided to define my own. The Bennett Innovation Foundation was born on a cold, bright morning in January. $20 million, half of my IPO earnings, dedicated to supporting women in healthcare technology. I chose the name deliberately. Let them choke on it, I thought. Let them watch as I rebuilt the Bennett name, not with old money or empty titles, but with impact. When I told Alicia, her eyes shone. "You're not just changing healthcare," she said. "You're changing the conversation." By the time Goldman Sachs rang the opening bell on IPO day, Vitalink's valuation had exceeded all projections. $220 million, 0 cents on day one. Reporters chased quotes, investors jockeyed for meetings, the spotlight burned bright. And through it all, I held the line. No family involvement, no board seats, no financial stake. But of course, they kept trying. The first came from Andrew, a sleek email thinly veiled as congratulations. "Incredible IPO, Claire. Would love to explore how the Bennett Fund could participate in future rounds. Strategic family positioning would benefit all." I deleted it without reply. Next, Vivian, a handwritten note, familiar script on heavy paper. "So proud, darling. The foundation is a wonderful idea. We must discuss a joint initiative. The family would love to host a benefit on your behalf." I placed the card in a drawer, unopened again, and then Richard called, 3 times. Finally, I answered. Claire. His voice was measured. Congratulations. Truly. I'd like to tour your offices. Privately. No press. I paused. Are you ready to see what you tried to cut off? A beat. Yes. A week later, Richard walked through Vitalink's glass-walled headquarters, visibly surprised. Engineers at work, patient advocates leading calls, a board covered in metrics and milestones. It's impressive, he admitted at last. Not at all what I imagined. What did you imagine? I asked. He hesitated. Something smaller, less significant. I regarded him calmly. You tried to motivate me by cutting me off. That wasn't what drove this. A rare flicker of honesty crossed his face. I see that now. Later that evening, Maggie joined me for dinner at the loft. You've handled them perfectly, she said. Respectful, boundaried. It's still hard, I admitted. Part of me wishes they'd genuinely understand what I've built, not just its dollar value. They may never, she said gently, but the right people will. I smiled, grateful for her clarity, and as we raised our glasses, a new message buzzed across my phone. Alicia, Senator's Health Innovation Forum confirmed. High visibility, big press. Are you ready? I stared at the screen. Ready or not, I thought. It was time to step on to an even larger stage. The Senator's Health Innovation Forum was held in Washington, D.C. beneath the gilded ceilings of the Hart Senate office building. A setting heavy with history and thicker still with eyes watching every move. I arrived early, hair pulled into a tight, low bun, black tailored suit, minimal jewelry, no entourage, just purpose. The moment I stepped onto the elevated stage, I could feel it, the shift. No longer was I the daughter of a family name. I was now the woman whose vision had made headlines, whose foundation had redirected venture funds, whose voice was drawing policy attention. Senator Walsh introduced me with crisp warmth. Claire Bennett represents a new era of innovation, where healthcare and humanity are not at odds, but inseparable. I stood, took a breath, and looked directly into the cameras. My family taught me that legacy was inheritance, I began. But I've learned, painfully, that legacy must be earned, and the only inheritance worth fighting for is the future we create. I spoke of Vitalink's beginnings, patients with no access, providers with no tools. I spoke of the women inventors who were dismissed, underfunded, and overridden. And I told the truth. I didn't build this because I was welcomed. I built it because I was denied, and denial is often the soil where determination grows. There was silence, then applause, then questions, then more interviews. By sunset, I was trending on X, quoted in The Atlantic, and flagged by 3 national networks. But the spotlight, as always, casts shadows. That night, as I returned to my hotel suite, Elisa called. You need to see this. She sent the link. It was an investigative piece by an independent journalist. The hidden hands behind the Bennett legacy, the headline burned across the screen. Below it, scanned documents, old board meeting notes, dated memos, and near the bottom, Richard Bennett's signature on a document proposing cuts to early-stage women-led startups during his tenure at the family's venture arm. The article named him directly. Richard Bennett, father of Claire Bennett, may now face scrutiny over ethical conflicts as his daughter's foundation rises to national prominence. I froze. This wasn't just backlash. This was exposure. I knew Richard wouldn't take it lightly. He loathed public embarrassment more than private loss. Within minutes, my phone rang. It wasn't Alicia. It wasn't Maggie. It was Richard. I stared at the screen as it buzzed in my hand, his name pulsing like a warning. Was this a call of fury, a desperate plea, or something far more calculated? My thumb hovered over the screen. I let it ring and ring and ring, because sometimes silence, especially in the face of legacy, is louder than any answer. Now that Richard Bennett has been exposed to the public, will he strike back as a father, or as the man who built an empire on silence and control. When your success finally casts a shadow over those who once dismissed you, how do you carry the weight of both vindication and betrayal? Don't miss Chapter 6, the final reckoning, where truth, blood, and legacy collide in a way Claire never expected. Chapter 6, the name I never knew. Every family has a secret they think they've buried deep enough, until the daughter they erased starts digging. The call from Richard went unanswered, and then came the silence. Heavy, deliberate, no texts, no voicemail, not even a cryptic email from Margaret. Just void. But I knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. In my family, silence was always just the inhale before the next blow. 2 days after the article dropped, Alicia forwarded me a message flagged by our legal team. It wasn't from Richard. It was from Ruth Sinclair, the attorney who once managed the Bennett Trust, a woman I hadn't seen in over 2 decades. There is a sealed document tied to your mother's private estate. It was updated 3 months before her death. You were never meant to see it, but now you have legal access. My hands trembled as I clicked the encrypted attachment. Inside was a scanned copy of a letter, handwritten, not typed. Claire, there are truths I never had the courage to tell you but the worst thing a mother can do is let silence become inheritance. I stopped breathing. The rest of the letter unraveled everything I thought I knew. My mother, Eleanor, admitted she had hidden not just financial documents, but my birth certificate. The man I thought was my father, Richard, had known all along that he wasn't. But for the sake of image, of control, of legacy, they had agreed to never speak of it. His name is Daniel Hale, the letter said. He lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and walked away not because he didn't love you, but because he was forced to. The room felt colder. Suddenly the things that had never made sense, the coldness, the distance, the transactional parenting, all clicked into place. Richard hadn't just tried to erase me from the company, he'd erased my origin. I sat motionless for nearly an hour, then I packed a bag. I told Alicia I'd be offline for 2 days. I booked a one-way ticket to Santa Fe. I didn't tell anyone what I was looking for. I didn't even know myself. Closure? Answers? A man who might still be alive? But deep down, I knew it wasn't about Daniel Hale. It was about me, about reclaiming the name they tried to erase, not just from documents, but from memory. Santa Fe welcomed me with its dry heat and rust-colored hills that seemed to hold more secrets than any vault back in Boston. I stayed in a modest inn near Canyon Road, the kind of place that offered no room service but came with silence and clean windows, perfect for thinking or unraveling. I had no address, no photograph, just a name, Daniel Hale, a city, and a memory that didn't belong to me. It took me 3 days to find him. The local courthouse confirmed the man had once owned a gallery downtown. Hale and Merrow. It had been sold off a decade ago. No family listed, but a retired clerk recognized the name. He paints now, she said. Mountains, mostly. Lives up north, hermit type. That was enough. I drove up toward Tesuque Valley just after dawn. The desert air bit through my jacket, and the road narrowed as pine gave way to scrub and silence. Then, finally, a house, low-built adobe tucked behind a row of wild junipers. A man stepped out. He was older, gray at the temples, but his eyes were unnervingly familiar. Sharp, blue, mine. He looked at me the way someone stares at a storm they'd long stopped expecting. Not with fear, but with awe and resignation. "You must be Claire," he said. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, but we talked. For 5 hours. He had loved Eleanor once, fiercely. But she was under pressure, from her father, from Richard, from a family that didn't want scandal. A baby born out of wedlock in a lineage like the Bennetts, it was easier to sell the illusion. They offered me silence, he said, voice thin, or exile. He chose exile. I didn't forgive him. Not entirely, but I didn't scream either. Sometimes the truth doesn't heal. It just settles into the open air, like dust finally landing after a long windstorm. Before I left, Daniel handed me a box. Inside, sketches, dozens of them, from decades ago. Every one of them was of me. From memory, a toddler with a bow in her hair, a teenager in ballet shoes, a woman with her arms crossed, standing alone. He'd imagined my life, traced it on canvas. "You were never invisible to me," he whispered. "Not once." Back in Boston, Alicia met me at the airport with news. Your article went viral. Media outlets picked it up nationwide. There's a journalist from The Atlantic who wants to profile your journey, but she wasn't smiling. "There's something else," she said, handing me an envelope. It was unsigned. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No name, no greeting, just one line typed in bold. "Eleanor Bennett didn't die of natural causes. Ask Margaret." Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Claire Bennett's story wasn't just about betrayal, loss, or hidden bloodlines. It was about the quiet power of truth and the strength it takes to reclaim a name that was never truly yours to begin with. Her journey reminded us that sometimes the deepest wounds are inflicted not by strangers, but by the people who were supposed to protect us. And yet, healing begins the moment we stop asking for permission to exist. We hope Claire's courage, her stillness, and her refusal to be silenced have stirred something in you. Whether you've ever felt erased, underestimated, or pushed aside, may this story remind you you are not invisible, and your truth deserves a voice. If this story touched you, inspired you, or made you think, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. We're honored to tell these stories, not just of revenge, but of justice. Not just of endings, but of bold new beginnings. Until next time, this is FM Revenge, where silence breaks and stories rise.